this is going to appear at a conference on the subject of sport and meditation. What would you say? How would you address those two words, sport and meditation?
In terms of the two words, sport and meditation, what makes me very excited is to see the progress that we've had in this space. Like if we had have looked at sport and meditation 10 years ago, it wasn't as accepted as it is now. And I think being able to harness the power of meditation for athletes in terms of their performance and their recovery, but then just also as human beings, I think that's really come out strongly recently, is that, you know, while athletes are probably have a high amount of obsessive passion as well as harmonious passion, they are just human beings. We need to go to the toilet. We have emotions. We doubt ourselves every single day. But it's, you know, the turning up over and over again. And so I think there's a lot more acceptance that meditation is just, you know, it's a part of being an athlete now, rather than 10 years ago where it was people put up a whole lot of barriers when you mentioned mindfulness or meditation, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a pretty exciting space to be in.
And you have a PhD in this area, don't you?
That's correct. So I did a PhD in improving athlete well-being and specifically athletes in parasports. And we looked at that through the lens of using a mindfulness acceptance commitment therapy intervention within a motivational interviewing framework. So that was very rewarding. I went into the PhD saying, I don't want to become an academic. I want to gain these practical evidence-based skills that can then allow me to go out into various communities and be able to just have some practical, tangible results and help people.
And can you give me a practical example of your philosophy at work?
Yeah, so I'm Martin. I'm actually now at the Victoria State Emergency Services, and I work in the community connections team looking to improve community resilience. So that's, I run mindfulness classes for the SES on a Fridays. So that's a very practical application of the tools that I did gain during the PhD and the tools that I personally use every single day. So that's coming to life there. And then also it's a beautiful space when you get to work with athletes in the sense that they're very willing to experiment with different things that may help them in terms of specifically their performance. So there is a reasonable amount of research to say that mindfulness can enhance performance. And so being able to work with them in that space, and it was pretty powerful during the PhD. I had one athlete draw for me, like at the start of the intervention program that we did, this really dark tunnel, and then at the end of the program she drew a dark tunnel but there was light at the end of it. So I think using just whether it be breath work or various mindfulness techniques, etc., they can have a very powerful impact.
So you're a woman of achievement. You've done a lot of things and you've done them well. What are you proudest of?
That's how long is a piece of string? In terms of if we look at a proud moment in the sporting career, I vividly recall the 2018 UCI Para Road Cycling Championships. They were in Italy. They were at the bottom of the Dolomites. Ironically, the course wasn't too hilly, but we did have the beautiful mountains in the background. And in sport, it's pretty rare for everything to come together. Usually there's a few hurdles along the way. And I was physically in a very good place mentally and emotionally. And for that time trial, it was about 13.6 kilometers long. It was high 20s, about 28 degrees, but the core temperature definitely heated up. And I'm so proud of that race because executed it to our race plan. And when I asked my legs, I'm like, okay, guys, you need to give me a little bit of oomph here. And this might be an amputee thing, Martin, but I have named my legs. So my left leg, which is my full leg, is called Brutus. He does everything by force. And then my right leg, so the one that's a bit shorter, he's called Julius Caesar, because he has to kind of be a bit strategic with not having so much muscle bulk. So I'm like, okay, guys, come on, we need to work a little bit here. And they just responded and above and beyond what I requested. And that feeling of being in flow and executing it, and then getting the silver medal and crossing the finish line, knowing that you gave it absolutely everything that you had, is just so satisfying, and very rare, very rare in sports. So.
And why is it so rare?
Oh, I mean, for cycling, I mean, you can have punctured tires, mechanicals. Recently, I had my final training hit out on Kew Boulevard in Melbourne and had a bit of a crash where some debris and oil took out my front wheel, and then somehow I've come down and my cycling prosthetic has karate chopped my knee open down to the patella. So I had to go in an ambulance to get it stitched up and have surgery. And so that's pushed out Tokyo qualification till the end of May. So, yeah, I mean, for things to all come together, you do altitude training, you do heat training in terms of periodization, and then it's all up here as well. So it's pretty rare.
And what would you say to a young athlete who was suffering from anxiety? What would you say to them?
I've actually got, this beautiful quote on my board behind me in my kitchen at the moment saying, if we think of failure as simply that we haven't achieved what we set out to, we haven't achieved our plan, I think that makes it a whole lot less scary. In terms of when we are getting anxious, perhaps, about our races. I would also encourage them, given the context of what we're talking about today, is to start to explore some mindfulness and some breath work tools and techniques, because they can be very powerful to help manage that anxiety, but also to remember that all athletes get anxious. If you're not getting anxious, then I would question if you really care about what you're doing. And that anxiety is just a sign of, this is important to you. So how can we reframe that anxiety a little bit? So reframing, tapping into the tools of using some breath work, etc., and then having your strategies and your processes in place for that race or that competition.
And when you say breath work, you mean meditation, concentrating on your breath and just calming the whole system down, yeah?
Yeah, there's a whole lot of breathing techniques that you can do in terms of maybe a coherent breath where we're breathing roughly at about 5 breaths per minute to get our brain and our heart and those electrical signals in sync. So that's one type of breathing exercise that you can do. You can do your mindfulness of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you're naming 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can feel, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste, etc. There's a whole, it's kind of like a buffet is the way I explain it. And some days it might be suitable to have porridge and that's what your body's needing. And other days you might need some eggs on toast. So it's really tapping into what's going to be useful for you at that moment.
Who are you?
Martin, I am Jo Mitchell. I'm a clinical psychologist and co-founder of the Mind Room in Collingwood in Melbourne. So psychology. I'm also an auntie to 9 nephews and nieces. And I've worked in the sports industry for, I hate to say it, at least 30 years in a variety of roles, not always as a psychologist.
Can you tell me what sports?
Well, my first sport was orienteering. So I've competed in that since I was about 10 years old, and having recently moved back to Tasmania, I have refound my love of the sport, which is fantastic because I've been away for at least a decade. But professionally, I've looked after the Tasmanian Coaching Centre down here in Tasmania back in the 90s, and then I moved over to the UK, so I've worked in British Olympics and UK sport, and that's both the Olympic and Paralympic sports. And then back here in Australia, I spent a good deal of my career working in AFL, running the mental health and wellbeing services for the AFL. Currently, I work with cricket and with football, the real football. And work with individual athletes as well. So I have a bunch of athletes from a range of different sporting codes.
How did you arrive at the beliefs that are at the centre of your work? What events in your life led you to those insights?
Well, one fairly key one for me was I was working in the UK and working in a media marketing role, not in a psychology role, and had been loving my life over there, but then was just finding that I was getting a little bit frustrated, dissatisfied, didn't really know what that was about. And one of my really fabulous mentors over there got me to go through a values exploration activity.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So values are really our guiding beliefs, our principles that help us to make the decisions that we do every day. And so this was an activity, really a card sort activity. So just a whole lot of values and to go through and prioritize the ones that mattered to me. And for me, it was really a lot about growth and learning, and that had really stalled for me in my career so far. So that was a point for me to come back and do psychology. And I came back to Adelaide and studied. And it was a pretty traditional psychology training. So not a lot of, or any introduction really to mindfulness and meditation. But I was curious about it because of an athlete that I'd been spending time training with at the time, who had made mention of this thing that they were doing and that they were finding it really helpful in managing their anxiety. So that was really the beginning. But for me, the fundamentals of how I approach mindfulness and meditation have really come from working in Melbourne and I was lucky to work at Monash Medical Centre there, and Craig Hassard, who's one of the leading I guess, meditation, mindfulness people in Australia and globally. And so that was my really full introduction to mindfulness. So I see it as mindfulness and meditation as central to knowing yourself. And that's, I guess, at the core of what I would do, how I would use it in therapy or in coaching work with people, is if you can't take a look at your own experience, then it's going to be really hard for us to do any of the work that we need to do.
And was there a particular moment when all that gelled for you, that philosophy? Is there a story in there?
Yeah. So I think, look, it's the practice of it, right? So you can intellectually kind of read about it and understand it, but it's not until I think you have really your own consistent practice that it all comes together. And one particular moment I recall is sitting doing a meditation, and it was one on mindfulness of emotions, and sitting there and the whole time just going, I have no idea what this emotion is. No, don't know what it is. And towards the end of it, there was just this clarity where I went, oh my God, this is contentment. And just being able to notice contentment in myself, I think was a real turning point, because I think before then, maybe what you're really aware of is the really big, loud, strong emotional content of your life. And so recognizing this is contentment, and the things that, or the moments in my life where that turns up, was probably a real aha moment for me in how I apply and work with this.
So is it because you meditate that you acquire the awareness to recognize a subtle emotion? Is it the meditation that puts you into that place?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, meditation makes me more aware of my own experience and my own responses, and therefore also hopefully a better psychologist as well, because it helps you to tune in and notice what's going on between you and other people, but also maybe have clues as to what's going on for them, and then are able to ask really, hopefully, good questions.
So who are the most interesting athletes you've worked with?
I can't tell you that.
Oh, you can't answer that one. Well, just tell me a story. Like, I'm a young AFL footballer. I'm ambitious. I'm physical. I've been brought up in a certain culture of the game. What is it? But I'm troubled. It's an enormously pressured existence because of the scrutiny they're under and the severity of the criticisms made of them. Where would you take someone with that sort of range of feelings and emotions?
Yeah, look, the hardest thing that we faced with introducing meditation or mindfulness into that environment was acceptance of the idea in the first place. I think that there's a lot of resistance to anything that's seen as a little bit woo-woo or touchy-feely, or that just didn't really understand. So I think language is probably the first point and the first challenge. And so being able to talk about it in a way that really relates to their experience, rather than just diving in and going, hey, this is good for you, and now we're going to sit and meditate. Because a lot of the reports we were getting back from the players was that they had no idea, like they were doing this, clubs were bringing experts, probably people that were excellent at what they did, in to take meditation classes, and the players weren't really sure why they were there or what they were doing, and using it as an opportunity to get a little bit of rest. So they were having a nap during their meditation sessions, which isn't quite meditation. So language, I think, is kind of key. So
how would you put it to them?
Well, talk about something that they care about. And one of the things that they can really relate to, other than the performance side, is injury and illness. And so when we can talk about the impacts of mindfulness on recovery from injury, both physically and psychologically, suddenly they're a little bit like, oh, okay. And especially during that phase when some of the pressures are released, in that you may not be doing a typical training load, you may not be allowed to, you're probably pretty frustrated and want to sort of get back into regular training and back onto the field. So that seemed to be a bit of a sweet spot for us to be able to work with people during that and go, hey, what else are you going to do? Let's try this, let's experiment. So there was more willingness to experiment, but to talk about it as this is a way that we can help you to recover more easily from whatever injury or illness you might have.
This might seem a silly question, but so I'm an AFL player, I'm injured, I want to get back out there. You teach me to meditate. Mm-hmm. What is it you tell me to do when I'm in the meditative state?
So part of it will depend on who the player is, but a lot of it is just the awareness, right? So we'll start with something really simple like awareness of your breath and your body. So it's not going to necessarily start off with let's direct your attention towards your injury, but it's going to be how do we help you to unhook your mind from judgment and thinking and analysis and be here in this moment. So mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of body. We might move into emotions because there's a lot of emotions that turn up when they're feeling like this. So getting them to be able to sit with their emotional experience and rather than it take charge of them, for them to be able to see it and relate to it maybe a little differently. So yeah, we're going to start by just noticing. Sounds pretty boring when you say it out loud, doesn't it?
No, but I'm interested. So, and then once I make those steps, once I get to that point, at what point do you? What I'm leading towards is, at what point does the meditation directly address the injury?
So it will. So say the injury was that they were kind of resisting the injury. So the injury might bring up for them a whole lot of thoughts, like particularly if it's towards the end of a career, is this it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is this the end? Can I recover from this? Do I want to? Do I have the motivation and the energy to keep going? So we'll be unpacking when they doing the meditation piece, coming out of it, and then doing an unpacking of, well, what turned up for you? What are the thoughts that you're having related to the injury that appear?
And that's a conversation you have with them.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just meditate, like I guess the meditation facilitates the conversation and the reflection and the behavior change, if behavior change is necessary, after the meditation. So it's meditation and mindfulness plus. We're introducing cognitive, behavioral, and acceptance skills into this process.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but what you are really giving these people is an enhanced degree of self-awareness.
Yep, absolutely. Got it in one.
Okay.
Yeah, so I know who I am. We had a really lovely one where we were doing some work around values again with a bunch of new recruits, and they're often 18, 19, 20. This particular player had come from country town to the city. Can be fairly overwhelming. Like, not only are you in your first kind of proper job, but it's often your dream job and it's not always as you expect it to be, but the environment is really different as well. So what he noticed was that he'd been struggling a little bit, but wasn't really sure why. So that kind of, this is my dream, I'm here, why is this not connecting quite for me? So through the process of using things like meditation to take a look inside, but also combining it with the idea of values, he kind of came out going, you know what? At home, one of my core values is really friendliness, and it's easy at home because I know my community and, there's a comfort there. When I'm here, I'm just head down, get into the club, just try and stay out of trouble and keep up. So his behavior change was about, okay, when I walk into the club, so you walk in and you go past the reception desk, I'm actually going to stop, find out who's behind the reception desk and start to greet them, say hello and greet them by name. Now, it seems really small, but just shifting that action, getting him living in more alignment with his values, just was the catalyst for him opening back up, being his authentic self.
To the conference is sport and meditation. You've been involved with AFL clubs for 10, 15 years?
It's about I think the first club I worked with was in about 2008, 2009. So, yeah, it's on a bit.
So, what do those two words mean to you?
Well, I think when we talk about meditation in the context of sport, we've got two parts to it. We've got the 1 point concentration, that being present out on the field part of a meditative stance. And then we've got the welfare and the well-being part of it. So I think that they intertwine really nicely together. I think probably in some ways, even more importantly, is the environment that we create. So it's a high-stress environment. So the more support and connection, I've coined a little phrase, connection is protection. And I think that feeling of belonging, and we learn a lot from First Nations people about egalitarian connection, belonging, stories, symbolism, etc. That's really important for people's welfare. So I think, a lot of Western psychology tends to focus on individuals, and I believe we live in a context. So an individual on their own, it's hard to be healthy on your own. But when you're in a group and you feel connection and safety, and funnily enough, we've just done some psychometric testing with the team on their level of feeling of trust in the environment and with their both with players and staff in that community. And we've got very high levels of trust at the moment, which is fantastic. Now that needs to be looked after.
Which you did very well in the Bulldogs Premiership year. You looked after that trust very well.
Yes, yeah, it was very much together. So I think if we look at it in that context, that systems perspective of having everyone's come together, and meditation and being present and being able to, take a deep breath and, as we did, as Bob will allude to in the old days, that when something happens, being able to express your emotions, hug, shrug, that's been really important, that being able to accommodate many ways of being. During the hub period, it was interesting because we used to run just a little, 10-minute mindful exercise a couple of mornings a week. Bonte would, we started with Bonte and then that group grew. A very simple mindful exercise in the morning, and then at night time to help with sleep, we did some progressive muscle relaxation, as a group. And it was nice seeing, again, that connection. It was all about connection.
Okay. Bobby, what do the words sport and meditation mean for you?
Well, Flanners, I'm mindful that I'm with an audience of people who would have a very deep understanding of meditation, but my sort of basic understanding of it is to have a singular thought or mantra, whatever that is, to quieten everything else down. And the life of an athlete is days and days of preparation, which is essentially routine and more routine. So it's actually quite easy to find that meditative rhythm, but it all comes together in the chaos of the game day. And that's where, you could call it whatever you want to, but it's less sitting down and meditating in the cliched sense, and more about what Lisa has spoken to there about connection amongst each other, and to quieten down the outside noise and the chaos and the result, and whether the game's going with you or against you, to use things like symbolism. So the jumper in my sport, football, is maybe the most powerful symbol we have. So we could hold the jumper and it communicates to all of the players about bringing yourself back to the center, if you like, of what's the next challenge, what's the next step, are we all connected? Because without things like that, it's too difficult to get messages across, and that's when players can start to spiral and be consumed by all of the noise, by the chaos, by the 2 goals deficit on the scoreboard, by the opponent punching them in the back. So little moments like that where you can calm down okay, we're all in this together. We're about the jumper. That's who we are, and that's unique to everything else. So that those little things in that speed and chaos to find a bit of peace.
And you played with. The thing about footy, one of the attractive things about it is you get this great range of personalities, and you have to bring them into one. And that's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I distinctly remember a session that Lisa ran with us as players, and this was before the Bulldogs of that time. So we're talking 5 or 6 years ago. I know the team's very successful at the moment, but 5 or 6 years ago, we were a bit of a basket case. And just as it started to turn, we ran a session as a whole playing group, and Lisa ran it, and she put up the at least you'll be able to describe it better, but a continuum of this is our playing group, and we are a whole mix of characters. Some of us are extreme here, and others, and we're wildly different. And to each of us, some of us seem a bit like aliens to each other, but we're each other's aliens. And I was in the room. I sort of found that quite interesting, but I could see the realization just from the body language. I saw the shoulders go and the light bulb moment of, oh, okay. So each player had a little frustration of, well, they don't understand me. These players, some of those guys don't understand me. But then you could feel the penny drop of, oh, and they might feel the same about me. So I have to accept some of them if they want to accept me. So it was a little bit of that give and take, because football clubs, they are a wild mix of characters. They are plucked from all corners of the country and sometimes overseas, different ages, different outlooks, different backgrounds. It is an absolute melting pot, and often the only thing in common is a love of the game.
And you played with Indigenous players?
Yeah, I did.
Sorry, keep going.
I know, what were you going to ask?
Oh, I've just heard you speak really well about it in the past, but just your take on how they approached the game differently. Yeah. How they had a sort of a natural simpatico with it, and that the European model is to load information on players. Yeah. Whereas they never lost their intuitiveness.
Yeah, I sort of feel like, and it's I suppose it's a little bit risky to use broad brushstrokes, but my experience was that a game of footy, each game is a different radio frequency, and the good players have got the set buttons to try and find that frequency and it just seemed to me that most of the Indigenous players, and certainly the best ones, were just so good at tuning into that frequency quicker than the rest of us and finding that song really quickly. The rest of us are kind of trying to set up plans and grids and corners to make the game sort of fit how we want it to, whereas there's a lot more flow, I think, with the Indigenous game. There's a lot more swerves and less corners to it, which is such an important part of a successful team.
I wrote a book on the Bulldogs 2016 premiership, and one of the things that really impressed me was that at that time in that year, there was a real integrity to your club culture and the way that the senior players would deal with matters and hold confidences. And you particularly, Lisa, like a lot of the players were telling you things, but you never passed them on. You had, when you were talking earlier about trust, that's essential to what you do, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know, particularly in an environment where people are in a fishbowl, and you know, look, people wouldn't talk to me if they couldn't trust me. And what I'm impressed about with this particular group of guys during that period, and now obviously we've got a new group who have really embraced that as well. And what Bob said, you know, we're all cognitively, we have a high cognitive diversity, you know, that overrides, obviously I'm a female, but, you know, my femaleness doesn't come into play when we're all together because of the respect for our difference. Rather than focusing on it, we focus on a lot of commonalities, but without losing that respect. I think that if you're going to have an organisation work well, you've got to be prepared to take the time to understand the messy stuff, you know, and sit with difficult stuff long enough to get a good solution. And I think that that's something that was really important back in the 15-16 period. It's really important now as well, is being able to actually deal with issues as they come up and deal with them as complex issues, and be able to sit with it long enough. Not one size doesn't fit all. And I think that that's really important because that gives a bit of faith. We're all treated equal, but not the same. And I think that that's, you know, part of what makes this particular group work so well.
And I think you better tell the story about the elephants so that people know the calibre of the woman they're dealing with.
Okay. I tend to tell a story. There are many times in life when every part of your body wants to slam into reverse and run away. But most things in life probably go better with an approach behaviour rather than an avoidance behaviour. Sometimes tactically you've just got to withdraw, but most things go better if you come at, you know, you go forward towards things. And one of the things that when I'm telling the story about how when all of your brain's saying run away, but the safest thing to go forward, the story I tell is about when I was in Botswana and I was in the Okavango Delta and been talking around I was pretending to be a tour guide at the time, and we're talking, you know, with the people around the campfire, and they were telling me about how in Chobe they teach the people when they're driving with a big trailer on the back with big logs so they can't reverse because a charging elephant goes faster, much faster than a reversing Land Rover on a sand track. And if you reverse at that time, they become emboldened and they stomp on you. So anyway, that was all theoretical at the time. I was hearing about that until I found myself coming back at twilight and I got stuck in a breeding herd of elephants crossing the track. And this big mummy came and was flapping her ears, and all I could remember was forward. And so I revved and went forward, and the mummy elephant, you know, got out of the way, and I nearly had a heart attack. And it's an example of how sometimes, even though every part of you wants to go backwards, you've got to go forward. And we often talk to the back line about that. Choose where you want to die. Do you want to be a caravan, or do you want to go forward and take the chance, you know? And, you know, generally forward is better. and so I learned a lot from that elephant experience, because I can tell you not one part of me wanted to go forward. Every part of me wanted to probably jump out of the landy and hide behind a tree. So it was very funny at the time. So that's one of my examples of how you can have a 1 point concentration, straight, forward. And then the noises of, yeah, but what if, etc., they get quieter and your body can perform the action. And we use those sorts of things all the time on field.
That's
I can attest to that. I can attest to that. That's what the jumper grab meant to us on the field, was come forward, keep pushing forward, stand in front. It was all very much body language change.
Yeah.
Forward momentum, so we could convey all of those things, because, you know, a footy team kicking 3 goals in a row is not quite as scary as stampeding elephants, but when you've got 50,000 people watching, it can feel quite similar. So that feeling of everything you want to do is retreat, but knowing the group around you, we've committed to, in this situation, we keep coming forward, was almost the secret ingredient for that team.
How much did the game change in the time you were in it with respect to the sort of ideas we're talking about today?
Brought up then, Bob, was about, lots of people have the words. I think everyone knows what the right words are now. You can look them up on Google about the right words for teams, but it's the actions and the feel. That part is important. And funnily enough, meditative practices are really good for quietening the mind enough to be able to do that, even when you've got the shits up, even when you're scared, because the pressure that comes from the uncertainty and the scrutiny and the expectations and everything, that's always going to be there, and we have to manage that. And meditative practices, whichever way you do them, are really great for being able to keep your core steady enough to follow what your true beliefs, that your collective belief, and we've got to have that. Otherwise, everyone's hair's on fire and going off half-cocked about things.
Kind of use it in two particular forms. One, the primary one, I think for me, is around attention and focus. So for me, that is a performance mental skill that is actually one of the most often ones I get asked to work on, particularly with coaches and teams. They all want to improve their concentration and focus. So for me, the application of mindfulness and meditation can assist that, because it brings us back to the present moment. And so often in athletes and sport, they're thinking about the outcome, which is the result, or they're thinking about last time they played at this ground, what mistake they just made previously, whatever that might be. Their mind can easily go to the past or the future. The application of mindfulness actually assists their focus and attention, because it brings them back to the present moment. That would be my primary use for it. And then my secondary use on top of that is developing self-awareness and to regulate the internal states. So what I mean by that is, when they're developing awareness to what's going on with them, they're actually understanding that there's things going on inside of them, such as thoughts or cognitions, emotions and feelings, and body sensations or physical sensations, such as fatigue, pain, any other type of disruption that might cause them distraction. For me, the application of mindfulness and meditation allows us to see those states, or allow those states to be there without changing them. So this is kind of different to a lot of other more formalized sports psychology, where we were taught to change those states. We were told to change our thoughts and change our emotions and try and feel at our best, because if we did, then we perform at our best. The more mindfulness approach is basically accepting those states, that sometimes we won't feel good, that our body will feel tired, that we won't think positively about our own performance, or we will have a lot of anxiety. The application of mindfulness and meditation allows those states to be there, so we're aware of them, but we're not looking to change them. And what that means is, going back to attention, is we can then put our attention to where we want to place it. So instead of worrying about me and what's going on inside of me, I'm more focused on the ball, my opponents, engaging with my teammates, etc., which again brings us back to the present moment. So there's one, attention, and two, awareness.
So let's imagine I'm an AFL player and we played in the grand final last year and lost.
Mm-hmm.
We're going into the fourth quarter. The flow of the game's against us. I'm having dark thoughts flooding in, which is robbing me of energy. I'm feeling beaten. What would you say to me?
Okay, I would say that's okay, that those thoughts are there, or that you've got that sense that last year might happen again, or what if it does happen again, and there'd be some sort of, I imagine, shame and humiliation to that. You'd be able to go, so what we would do is, most people would be saying, I don't want those thoughts, so I don't want those feelings. But I'd be saying, I understand why you have those thoughts and feelings, and it's okay for them to be there, but what do you really want to focus on right now? What's your key objective? And you might say, you might be able to rehearse them to yourself, or you might go to the coach or your line coach and go, so if a midfielder and you're a contested ball, it's about making sure you've got the setup right in the stoppage. So if you're the sweeper, make sure you're there, you're communicating with teammates in terms of stoppage setup, and then you're hunting the ball. And when you don't have the ball, you'd be hunting the man. whatever your cues were, to focus on your performance. And sometimes that's where coaches can be really, really crucial in this, because if they understand the approach, they can just keep it very simple for you. But if you're talking to me personally in the kind of psychological component, I've been normalizing those thoughts and feelings, not trying to get rid of them, which is what the traditional sports psychology was.
So you're saying to me, what you would say to me is just accept the fact that those thoughts are present, and in that acceptance, you'll get some relief from them.
Yes.
And apply your intelligence to the mechanics of the game.
That's exactly right. So everything about mindfulness, whether it's in performance or well-being, it's about noticing what comes up and accepting. And as soon as we can notice and accept without change, we're not putting all of our psychological energy into it. Because most of the time, our psychological energy is going into changing that state. If we go into acceptance, we go, okay, I've got much more freedom to put my energy where I want it to be, which is tactical setups, engaging my teammates, hunting the ball, whatever the cues might be. I've now got a lot more energy for those applications, so therefore I'm going to perform better anyway. So it goes back to the old saying of don't think about pink elephants. If you try not to think about pink elephants, you tend to think about pink elephants. And we spend a lot of time trying to get rid of that thought, but what that does is really distract us from the job at hand.
And so what was the prior approach was that when these feelings came upon you, you sought to banish them.
That's right. So the traditional sports psychology approach was you've got to think straight, think clearly or think positively. So there'd be more positive affirmation is we will win, we're going to win this, we're going to win, which is kind of almost like, well, no one knows that. That's unfounded, but there was this kind of very much had to have that positive affirmation. You had to build yourself up to be the incredible Hulk, to feel good and kind of burst through the pack type of thing. And that can work for some people, but it's got to be an end point, meaning what happens when it doesn't? It works till it doesn't. Do you know what I mean? And the reality is we do sometimes lose, or sometimes we don't perform as well as we want to. So we need to be accepting of all those states. And that's where the meditation helps.
Can you tell me a story about something which has occurred in this area to you that struck you as particularly interesting?
Yeah, well, I think I really highlighted a national runner that we had who spent a lot of time, who was on the edge of kind of Australian kind of selection for some period of time, just by ability, but spent a lot of time worrying about where her end goal was going to be and worried what the outcome was going to be, worried what her coach thought of her, worried about sponsors, worried about team selections and so on and so forth. She was so worried about the destination, she forgot about the journey. And as soon as we talked about the journey and how to engage in it and what we wanted it to look like, as in, I want to get the best out of myself. What does it look like when I train really hard? What does it look like when I actually enjoy the process of getting better, which is a much more journey-orientated approach, that she actually started to become A, more fulfilled, B, actually started to enjoy her sport more, and then ultimately she actually performed better. Because once you remove the outcome, sport's actually a lot more enjoyable. So for you, Martin, it'd be like writing an article and thinking the whole time, will the audience enjoy this or like this? Yeah. And if you spend all your energy on that, it's not an enjoyable process, is it, to write something?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this applies to what you do, but the essence for me to write well, the most important person I have to interest is myself. And if that happens, then I'm a chance to get other people to come along.
So that was the case with this runner as well, and she has broken through, and I think she's got a bright future ahead. But it was definitely that mental shift that we had to change with her, because the anxiety was just so overwhelming for her. She could never perform nowhere near her best with that. She was mostly fatigued before races, actually, because of it.
And are young people today receptive to your message?
Yes. Yeah.
But do you feel that your message is actually in tune with the time we're in?
Without getting kind of ahead of myself here, it's probably a little bit behind. It's probably a little bit in front of the time. You know, in sport, like I think in well-being, I think it's quite a common approach now in psychology and overall, that we've removed ourselves from trying to change states to a more accepting state. And I think that's been helpful. Where sport, there's so much, yeah, but if I don't win, I'm not going to get that contract. Or if I don't win, I'm not going to get that, you know, they're much more black and white. So it's a lot harder for them to fathom.
Mm.
But once they realise that they're spending so much energy worrying about things anyway, it's actually a relief for them once it clicks. But it is a harder sell to athletes. So they go, but it is really important. And I've got to think about winning, you know, because that's the world that they live in. It's like asking a gymnast not to be perfectionistic, but they're scored out of 10 everything they do. Unfortunately, there is some harsh consequences and repercussions to their results. A lot more than the writing an article and me working with a client. It's in their world, it is more black and white.
You played AFL footy between what years?
Oh, look, we're going back a long time now, Martin. I've got to think very carefully. So I think I started at Eston as a young man in about 1979, and then I think I finished at Carlton in 1997. So close to sort of 18, 19 years.
And how many games did you play?
Who's counting? But 332 AFL games. Which is more an indictment on AFL football rather than a compliment to myself.
Now, you were the first player I ever heard of that was using meditation.
Yeah, but I don't think I was the first, but I may have been the first one to talk about it, because there was a period of time when I think it must have been 1980, it must have been about 1988, 1989, where Carlton were not winning. And you know, they continue to do that today, but at this point in time, that was sort of not tolerated. And they replaced Robert Walls mid-season with Alex Jeslenko as a coach. Yeah. And I think Alex was fairly laid back. He was very competitive, but he was also very laid back. And somewhere along the line, he decided he would introduce the concept of meditation to the team.
Good Lord.
And that was transcendental meditation.
Yeah.
And so we all the senior team, you know, about 30 of us or so, learnt to meditate in order to try and win a few more games. And it definitely worked for a while. And given the limited ability we had in that team at the time, I think, although the expectations were higher, I think it served a very useful purpose for that season and following seasons in terms of our performance.
So who taught it to you?
A gentleman by the name of Steve Griffith, and he still teaches transcendental meditation. But the irony of it, there's a sort of a procedure or a process, which is a very traditional process when somebody like Steve Griffith teaches transcendental meditation. So he was teaching them at his home in Ivanhoe in sort of half an hour slots over a long weekend. But as part of that tradition, you had to turn up with a small bunch of flowers, a piece of fruit, and a white handkerchief. Now, I don't know why. It has something to do with Ayurvedic healing or something. And so, you know, to anybody who didn't know what was going on there, but could see from a distance, at half an hour intervals, you know, AFL footballers turning up with a white handkerchief, a bunch of flowers and a piece of fruit would have been, I think, somewhat disturbed by it. But as some of the players found it a bit, they found it a bit weird. But it was, it all made sense in the end, so it was good.
Now, a lot of people I've met along the way have tried to learn meditation, but were unable to do so. What was the key to you learning it?
Oh, I think it was just having an open mind to it, and I think not trying too hard. I think it's a little bit like learning anything and improving at anything. I think if you try too hard and become too too caught up in excelling, then don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Oh, I'm with you on that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think you've got to go through you got to be relatively patient to make something good out of something that's not quite good in the first place, and then maybe over time you might perfect it. And I think that was sort of how I played football. Whereas I suppose some of my competitive colleagues had to be perfect at it pretty quickly because they had a different sort of sense of expectation. So I continued to. I found it very useful. I'm not sure all my colleagues did. Some of them, I think, improved their performance, improved, and they relaxed a bit more and were less caught up in the static that goes with AFL football around the edges. And I think that was useful at the time because there, whilst it didn't have the profile then that it does now, there's a lot of, white noise, a lot of static in the background that can distract you from what you need to do for yourself and for the game and for your team. And I think it was very useful at that time to, I wouldn't say the word focus because I think that's not quite the right word, but to concentrate, but not in a to concentrate better on what we needed to do and let the background noise sort of fade away. And I've always found that very useful.
So did you find it hard to learn, or did you?
No, I didn't. I didn't. I wasn't skeptical about it. I'm sure if you're a bit skeptical about it and it's sort of not imposed on you, but if it was, through a football club, if you were sort of told that you should do this, I think there's a bit of pushback from some of the more strong-willed players, I suppose. There might be, or they might be a little bit reluctant to really maintain it. But there's a discipline that goes with it, and it's through that discipline that, like anything in life, you can improve it over time. And it's not something that happens straight away. The impact and the effect of it, and the good that comes of it, I think it takes a bit of time. And the process itself, I think, as you improve at it, you also relax at it, and that makes you better at it in many ways. I found with my football, it definitely improved my football at the time. And it improved a whole lot of other things in my life. Not dramatically, but over time, and looking back, I can see that it made a big difference. And I can also see that it sort of set me up in a whole lot of other areas of my life to be less, and to prioritise things in a way that made sense. And also to, one of the most useful things whilst playing football was recovery. If you're a bit stressed or a bit tense, your recovery is not going to be good. Because that's after a match, your muscles are tense, they're tired. You've been put under physical stress. You meditate, you sort of release that sooner rather than later. So it definitely assisted with recovery. And I was always the joke at the football club was I became an expert at recovery. I wasn't great at training, but I was very good at recovery. But I think it extended my football career because of that. I played till I was about 36, and most footballers finish sort of, if they're lucky, early 30s. So I reckon I got a few more years out of it because of my ability to put an emphasis on recovery, and a significant part of that recovery was meditation.
So are you still doing it?
I do. I don't do it as regularly as I should. There are times when I know I need to do it because there are a lot of distractions and I need to concentrate. But I'm prompted by today that I should maintain that discipline better. So I will continue to meditate, but I need to meditate more often. When we were taught to sort of meditate for 20 minutes in the morning. And 20 minutes sort of late in the day or evening at your choice. And I think if you do it twice a day for long periods of time, it makes a very significant difference.
Yeah. And do you know if any of your old teammates have stuck with it?
Maybe one or two, but I don't think many have actually. I think we might have been a bit too esoteric for some of them.
Yeah.
A lot of them were very practical people. They weren't sort of ethereal or esoteric or any of those things. You like those words? I just like to use them every now and then. And I think that I was open to it. Others were, but But it's also a thing it's also one of those things where constant practice makes it better and makes it more relevant to you too. The other thing I found too, and I still find is, and I don't profess to know anything about the cosmos or, the great cosmos that we exist in, but there's something about if you are a strong practitioner in meditation, things happen to you which are not a coincidence.